This story is titled, I Was Falsely Accused by My Golden Brother's Girlfriend. My family believed her and disowned me. Now they want to reconcile. Hey guys, I never thought I'd be the one writing this here, but life has a funny way of coming full circle. So buckle up. This one's a mess. Let's get into it. I, 25 male, always knew my younger brother, Ryan, 23 male, was the favorite. It wasn't even subtle. My parents, 55 female and 59 male, worshipped the ground he walked on. He was the golden boy, the one they bragged about at family gatherings, the kid who could crash a car into a tree, and they'd somehow find a way to blame the tree. Meanwhile, I was the problem child. Not because I actually was a problem, but because I wasn't him. I could do everything right, and it still wouldn't matter. If I got straight A's, they'd say Ryan was naturally intelligent and didn't need to try as hard. If I won an award, they'd brush it off like it was just an extracurricular. If I worked my ass off at a summer job, they'd laugh about how Ryan was enjoying his youth instead of wasting time on nonsense. It was like I was background noise in my own family. It wasn't just about how my parents favored him. Ryan was a total jerk with me as well. He was a master manipulator when it came to turning our parents against me. He never had to try hard because honestly, they already favored him. I remember when I was about 17, I was studying for a big exam. Ryan kept coming into my room, messing with my stuff, poking me in the back of the head, humming loudly, just being an annoying little shit on purpose. I told him to get out, but he ignored me. After about 10 minutes of this, I slammed my textbook shut and yelled at him to leave me alone. Of course, he immediately ran to my parents. Suddenly, I was angry all the time and scaring him. He told them I was stressed and taking it out on him. I tried to explain what actually happened, but my parents weren't interested. They just told me I needed to work on my temper and stop bullying my little brother. He was an expert at planting doubt in my parents' heads. He wouldn't just outright accuse me of things, he'd just imply things, drop little comments that would make them start questioning me. One time I saved up and bought myself a new laptop. I was proud of it. I worked for months to afford it. Ryan, of course, was jealous. So, one day, he casually told my parents, I don't know how he could afford that. Are you sure he didn't take money from somewhere? That's all he had to say. Suddenly, my parents were grilling me about my finances, demanding to see proof of where my money came from. They never would have asked Ryan that question, but because it was me, they immediately assumed I was up to something shady. So as I grew up, I tended to avoid their drama. I focused on myself. I got into working out, picked up some skills, saved money where I could. I knew I wouldn't get handouts from my parents, so I made sure I wouldn't need one. While Ryan was the total opposite. He was the kind of guy who thought life was one big vacation. He never held a job for more than a few months. He always had some new hobby or business idea that never went anywhere. He went to college, but not to actually study, more like to hang out, party, and barely scrape by. My parents funded the whole thing. Then came his girlfriend, Zoe, 22 female. Zoe and Ryan started dating when he was in college. She was exactly the type of person he'd go for. Loud, always needing attention, and always on social media trying to act like an influencer. She had a fake kind of charm, the type that worked on guys like Ryan, but was easy to see through if you actually paid attention. Zoe was the kind of girl who thrived on drama. If there wasn't a problem, she'd create one just for the attention. She had a habit of exaggerating everything that happened to her. If someone at a store gave her a weird look, suddenly it was, that cashier was so rude to me, probably jealous or something. If she got constructive criticism in class, it became, my professor is literally targeting me because I'm too pretty. If a waitress got her order wrong, she'd act like it was a personal attack and would go off on some long-winded rant about how people don't respect her. Everything had to revolve around her. She'd hijack conversations, make everything about herself, and had this ridiculous need to be the center of attention no matter where she was. You know, a typical pick-me. At first, I didn't care. She was just another girlfriend. Ryan cycled through them every few months, and I figured she'd be gone soon enough. But Zoe stuck around, and after a while, I started noticing little things. She was trying to get a bit too friendly with me. And you know what I mean when I say friendly. She'd go out of her way to compliment me when nobody was around. You're so disciplined. I wish Ryan had your focus. Stuff like that. At first, I ignored it. I figured she was just trying to make conversation. But then it escalated. She started asking me more personal questions. Stuff that had nothing to do with casual small talk. She'd ask about my workouts, how often I went to the gym, what kind of supplements I took. Then she'd make little jokes like how Ryan should learn from me with this weird smirk. She'd text me out of nowhere, asking for advice on things that had nothing to do with me. And these weren't random, innocent messages. They were obvious. At first, it was stuff that could have been explained away. Hey, do you know a good app for meal planning? Or what protein powder do you use? Simple questions that could have gone to anyone. But then the tone changed. You must get so many girls hitting on you at the gym. You probably don't even notice anymore. If I worked as hard as you, maybe I'd look half as good. You should train me sometime. Bet you could teach me a few things. Ryan's so slow sometimes, lol. I kept my responses short and cold. The first time she sent something like that, I shut it down quickly. Not gonna happen. Don't text me like that again. She backed off for about a week. Then it started again. It was like she thought if she kept pushing, I'd eventually cave. She started texting late at night more often, but I would leave her messages on read. And the way she acted when we were in the same room, that's when it became impossible to ignore. If we ended up alone, like if Ryan left the room or went outside, she'd lean in just a little too close when she talked. She'd laugh at things that weren't even funny, brushing her hand against my arm as if it was totally accidental. And her compliments? They started sounding more like invitations. I was disgusted, but the worst part? She was careful. She never said anything that could get her in trouble if someone overheard. But she always pushed the line, testing how far she could go. Looking back, I should have shut it down sooner, but I figured she was just playing some dumb game to make Ryan jealous. It wasn't my problem. But then, one night after a family dinner, she sneaked to my room. That's when I realized it wasn't just harmless flirting. She leaned in way too close, blocking my way out. Her voice was lower than usual, like she was testing the waters. She told me she was bored with Ryan, that I was different, that she wouldn't tell if I didn't, and then she tried to kiss me. I pushed her off immediately. Are you out of your damn mind? I wasn't even subtle about it. I told her to stay the hell away from me, and that if she tried this again, I'd expose her myself. And just like that, her whole act switched. She wasn't embarrassed. She wasn't apologetic. She just looked at me, calculating. And in that moment, I knew she wasn't just going to let this go. And with that, she put on that fake smile again, then left the room like nothing just happened. I thought maybe she'd keep her distance after that she'd realize she messed up and just avoid me. But she took things in a completely different direction. The next day, I came home, and the house felt off. My parents were stiff. Ryan looked at me as if I just murdered his dog. And then Zoe, standing behind them, started crying. I didn't want to say anything, but he tried to force himself on me last night. I froze. Wait, what did you just say? For a second, I thought I misheard her. Then I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was so completely ridiculous that I thought it was a joke. Tef? She was just trying to seduce me last night. Now she's acting like the victim. I was too stunned. She deserved an Oscar at this point. Ryan lunged at me. My dad had to hold him back. You sick freak? I looked at Zoe, waiting for the punchline, waiting for her to cut this crap. But she just stood there, looking hurt like I had actually done something. I tried to explain. I told them she was the one who came on to me. I told them I rejected her, that this was some kind of revenge because she was scared I'd expose her. But none of it mattered. None of them believed me. They didn't ask for proof. They didn't try to hear my side. They didn't even hesitate. My dad coldly said, "Get your things and get out." I looked at my mom. She wouldn't even meet my eyes. I wanted to fight it. I wanted to scream at them for being so stupid to believe such a thing. But I knew how this worked. They had already made their choice. And judging by how I was always given the black sheep treatment, arguing would be pointless. Since that day, I knew there's no place for me with these people. So I packed a bag and left. Getting kicked out was one thing. Realizing how easy it was for them to do it, that was worse. No hesitation, no doubt, no second guessing. They threw me away like I was nothing, like I wasn't their son, like I hadn't been part of that family for over 20 years. And the thing that really got me? Not a single phone call, not a single text, not even a half-assed, "Are you okay?" from my mother. They cut me off completely, and later I realized that was for my good. I didn't have much, just a duffel bag of clothes, a few $100 in my bank account, and my car. That was it. I hadn't been planning for this, but luckily, I had some money saved from odd jobs I'd done over the years. Not much, but enough to keep me from sleeping on the street, at least for a little while. I spent the first few nights in my car, and believe me, that was pretty far from fun. But I had to live. Later, as the news about the whole thing spread among the family, I got a call from my cousin, Lucas, 28 male. He was the only one who didn't buy into Zoe's bullshit. He's always been my buddy since childhood. I remember him having my back whenever Ryan tried to screw things up for me. He offered me to stay at his place for a while. At this point, he was a real brother to me. I stayed at his place for a few days till I pulled myself together. I couldn't stay with him for too long. I already know he's got his own problems to deal with, and I never wanted to burden him, even though he insisted that I stay. I left, and we stayed in touch. After that, I found a temp job at a warehouse within a week. It paid like crap, but I wasn't in a position to be picky. I also scraped together enough money to rent a tiny room in a shared house, the kind of place where the walls were thin, and you had to pray your roommates weren't drug addicts or lunatics. Then, I got another gig working overnight at a gas station. 2 jobs. No sleep. Just working, eating whatever was cheap, and crashing for a couple of hours in my car between shifts. It was a grind, but I wasn't about to sit around feeling sorry for myself. Every second I wasted being pissed off was a second I wasn't working toward getting out of this mess. Ryan, meanwhile, was living it up. I tried not to check his social media, but sometimes curiosity got the best of me. Every time I saw his posts, it was the same thing. Parties, vacations, expensive new things. He was even still posting pictures with Zoe. It was like watching a kid burn through his inheritance in real time. My parents were still bankrolling his lifestyle, and he was milking it. I won't lie, it pissed me off. Not just because of the unfairness of it all, but because I knew exactly how this was going to end. Ryan had never worked a real job in his life. He had no skills, no work ethic, no plan. He was burning through money like it would never run out. But one day, it would. And when that day came, I knew exactly who he'd come running to. But that was not my problem. Right now, I had to focus on surviving and building a life for myself. So in a few months, the warehouse job turned into something more stable, and I started picking up extra shifts whenever I could. I lived cheap, no wasting money on dumb stuff. Every dollar went toward building a safety net. Once I had a little cushion, I started thinking bigger. I picked up some books on finance and investing. Basic stuff at first. Just learning how money worked, how to save it, how to make it grow. I started looking into business too, reading about people who'd built their own companies from nothing. Half of it didn't apply to me, but it gave me ideas. I even taught myself some coding. Nothing crazy, just enough to pick up side gigs online. Any spare moment I had, I was learning something new. I didn't want to just survive, I wanted to be untouchable. Then I started freelancing. It was slow. I'd do small jobs online, designing simple websites, writing blog posts, stuff like that. 10, 20 bucks here and there. It didn't seem like much, but I stuck with it. Every gig meant more experience, more connections, more good reviews. Eventually, I started landing bigger projects, building websites for small businesses, doing digital marketing, even some basic app development. Before I knew it, I was making as much from freelancing as I was from the warehouse job. I still remember the day I made my first $1,000 in a single month from freelancing. It wasn't much, but it felt like proof that I was onto something. That maybe I didn't have to grind away in a warehouse for the rest of my life. After a year, I finally moved out of that crappy shared house and into my own place. It wasn't fancy, just a small apartment in a decent neighborhood, but it was mine. No more dealing with sketchy roommates or wondering if my stuff would go missing. For the first time in my life, I had my own space. That's when things really took off. I quit the warehouse job and went full-time into freelancing. Without the long shifts and physical exhaustion, I could focus completely on growing my business. I started raising my rates, taking on more clients, and expanding my skill set. I learned SEO, digital advertising, and e-commerce. I built websites that actually helped businesses make money. And once word got around, clients started coming to me instead of the other way around. By year 2, I wasn't just getting by. I was comfortable. I had savings in the bank, no debt, and the freedom to work on my own terms. But I didn't stop there. I started thinking long-term, how to scale this thing beyond just freelancing. So I built my own website, created packages for different types of businesses, and started marketing myself as a consultant instead of just a freelancer. I automated the small stuff, emails, invoices, scheduling, so I could focus on the bigger projects. I even started outsourcing some of the work to other freelancers, taking a cut of their fees while still delivering high-quality results to my clients. By year 3, I was making more money than I ever thought possible. Not millionaire rich, but enough to live comfortably, save for the future, and never worry about paying the bills again. More importantly, I had control. No boss, no schedule I didn't choose, no one to answer to but myself. Look now, about my family. I cut them off completely since that Zoe incident. They didn't even try to reach out anyway, and I couldn't care less. During all that time, I was still in touch with Lucas. We would meet up from time to catch up. One day when I hadn't met Lucas for a couple of months, he called me and asked me to meet him, telling me there's some big news I had to hear. I met him at a coffee shop the next day, and without introductions, he was like, "Yo, you won't believe what I'm about to tell you." I was already expecting it was some massive update about my family. Well, I was right. At first, he told me how Ryan's life was starting to crack. It started with small things. The flashy vacations stopped. The constant flexing on social media slowed down. He was having money problems. Apparently, he had tried to start a business. Some half-baked entrepreneur nonsense that he thought would make him rich overnight. It failed spectacularly. He lost a ton of money, burned through his savings, and still hadn't figured out how to work an actual job. People always say you learn who your real friends are when you hit rock bottom. Ryan learned it the hard way. The same people who had been partying with him, the same ones who cheered him on when he was wasting money, all disappeared the second he wasn't useful anymore. Now comes the real tea. Zoe. For a while, she had been just as flashy as Ryan, if not worse, posting about how they were living the dream, acting like they were the next power couple. But once the money started running out, she ditched him. They even found out that she cheated on, hooking up with one of her friends. Oh, about this. Things will get even more interesting. Honestly, I saw it coming. She was never in it for the long haul. She was there for the lifestyle, the attention, the free vacations, and the Instagram-worthy moments. Once Ryan couldn't provide those things anymore, she cut her losses and bailed. And my parents? They were finally noticing. They had spent years throwing money at him, hoping he'd somehow magically become successful. But now, with nothing to show for it, they were finally questioning things. I wasn't part of their lives anymore, but I knew how they thought. My mom must have been devastated seeing her perfect son start to fail. My dad, the same guy who kicked me out without a second thought, must have been wondering why his golden child still needed handouts. I should have felt bad for them, for Ryan, but I didn't. But here's where it gets interesting. Zoe was known to have a big mouth, the type to talk way too much, especially when she's drunk. Turns out, after she left Ryan, she went out with some of her old party friends and let her mouth run a little too freely. And guess what? She drunkenly admitted everything. She told them she had lied about me, that I never actually done anything to her, that she only accused me because I had rejected her and threatened to expose her. She thought it was hilarious how my parents immediately took her side, how she had played the victim so well that they hadn't even considered questioning her. She was laughing about it, bragging, treating the whole thing like some stupid joke. And her friends? They thought it was funny too. Funny enough to record her saying it. At the time, I had no idea this was happening. I was too busy living my life to care about what any of them was up to. But Lucas told me that one of her friends, someone just as toxic as she was, eventually sent that recording to my parents. I don't know why. Maybe she was pissed at Zoe for something. Maybe she just wanted to stir up drama. Either way, my parents got the recording. I wasn't there to see their reaction, but I can imagine it. The realization, the shame, the undeniable proof that they had ruined their relationship with their own son over a complete lie. So here's the thing, after I got this massive news, and while Ryan was getting a slap on the face with his own issues, guess who tried to reach out to me again? Yes. It started with a bunch of missed calls from my mom and dad. Then mom would message me something like, "We need to talk," followed by a bunch of sob voicemails telling me they realized they were wrong and how sorry they were. Rayan would also text me asking me if we could talk. Yeah, now they need to talk. I ignored it. I wasn't stupid. I knew exactly what was happening. They weren't reaching out because they missed me. They weren't apologizing because they had some grand revelation about how terribly they had treated me. No, they just need to fix their own guilt. They couldn't stand the idea that they had thrown me out like garbage, only to find out years later that it was all based on a complete lie. They needed to fix it, but only for themselves. I wasn't interested, until my mother left a voicemail that caught my attention. "Ryan is in serious trouble. Please, just call me back." I almost laughed when I heard it. Serious trouble? What? Was his credit card finally maxed out? Did his latest get-rich-quick scheme collapse in on itself? Was he struggling to afford his overpriced apartment now that Zoe wasn't around to leech off of him? I let the voicemail sit there for a day before I caved and called back. Not because I cared, but because I was curious. She picked up on the first ring. "Oh, thank God," she breathed. "I wasn't sure you'd answer." I leaned against my desk, waiting. "What do you want?" She hesitated for a second, like she was still trying to figure out the best way to spin it. "It's Ryan," she said finally. He's in a lot of debt. He made some bad investments, took out loans. And now the banks won't help him. No one will." Now I did laugh. Because really, what did she expect me to say? "Oh no, let me swoop in and save him." Let me throw the money I worked my ass off for at the same people who tossed me aside with no hesitation. Instead, I asked, "And what does that have to do with me? You're doing well now. You have the means to help." And there it was. They had finally hit the bottom of the barrel. Ryan, their golden child, had crashed and burned so badly that the only person left who could bail him out was me. The same son they had humiliated and discarded over a complete lie. And now that their life was falling apart, now that they had no one left to turn to, I was suddenly worth talking to again? How funny. I let the silence drag out before I said, "You're joking, right?" She rushed. "We know we made mistakes. We know things should have gone differently. But family looks out for each other. And Ryan needs help. You wouldn't just let your family drown, would you?" I took a breath. Let me get this straight. You all believed a liar over me, threw me out without a second thought, ignored me for years, and now that Ryan has finally screwed up his own life beyond repair, you want me to fix it? Sweetheart, it's not. It is that simple, I cut her off. But instead of telling her to screw off like I wanted to, I said, "Let me think about it." And I hung up. No, I wasn't actually considering it, but I wanted them to sit with the uncertainty, to wonder if maybe, just maybe, I'd swoop in like the perfect son they had never appreciated. Let them hope. Let them wait. Then, finally, I set up the meeting. I told my mother to have everyone there, her, my father, and Ryan. If they wanted to beg, they'd do it to my face. We met at a restaurant, a nice one I knew they could barely afford anymore. They must have assumed I picked it to be polite. When I walked in, they were already seated. My mother looked like she had aged 10 years. My father, usually smug and confident, looked uncomfortable. And Ryan? He looked wrecked. For the first time in his life, he looked desperate. I sat down and leaned back in my chair. "All right," I said. "Go ahead." They didn't even pretend to ease into it. My mother immediately launched into a long-winded speech about family, forgiveness, second chances. My father, too proud to grovel, just muttered about how mistakes were made. Then Ryan spoke. "I screwed up, I know that. But I just need a little help, man. Just enough to get back on my feet." I let them talk. Let them pour it all out. I was enjoying it. Then, finally, I said, "No." I shrugged. "I'm not helping you?" My mother sucked in a sharp breath. "Sweetheart, be reasonable." "Reasonable?" I repeated. "What wasn't reasonable was abandoning me and only coming back now because your golden child finally ran out of luck." "Dude, I'm your brother." "No, you're not," I said simply. "You stopped being my brother the second you threw me under the bus." He wanted to argue, but I wasn't finished. I pulled out my wallet, took out a $100 bill, and set it on the table. "There, buy yourself some dignity." Then I stood up and left. Years of anger, resentment, and frustration. All of it just faded the second I left them sitting there, staring at the $100 bill like it was some kind of insult. Which, to be fair, it was. A few months passed. Life went on. I had spent years working my ass off, making sure I never had to depend on anyone. Now I was in a place where I could actually enjoy what I built. My business grew, my circle stayed solid, and I felt better than I ever had. For the first time in years, I felt completely at peace. My family on the other side, expectedly, were not doing well. Ryan's life had completely unraveled. The debt caught up to him faster than he could run from it. He had burned through every handout, maxed out every line of credit, and defaulted on loans he had no business taking in the first place. Desperation made him reckless. He got involved in some shady side hustles, trying to make quick cash, but predictably, he wasn't smart enough to cover his tracks. A few bad deals, a couple of unpaid debts to the wrong people, and suddenly, he was facing charges. It didn't take long for the whole thing to implode. Fraud, embezzlement, whatever half-baked scheme he thought would save him, ended up being what buried him. His business failures were one thing, but this was a federal-level screw-up. He got arrested, dragged through court, and eventually sentenced. The same guy who once had everything handed to him was now sitting in a prison cell, broke, alone, and with no one left to bail him out. My parents? Oh, they were devastated. Not because their precious Ryan turned out to be a full-blown criminal. Nah, that part didn't seem to bother them much. What really broke their hearts was that their golden child wasn't so golden anymore. Hard to keep up the perfect family act when your pride and joy is wearing an orange jumpsuit, right? They had spent years bending over backward for him, covering for his mistakes, throwing money at his problems like that would magically make him competent. And now, all that blind loyalty, just for him to end up in a prison cell with a bunch of other idiots. Every bridge they burned with me, every time they treated me like an outsider, yeah, they wish they could undo all that now. Too bad. By the time they realized they backed the wrong horse, I was already too far ahead to care. Edit. Thanks for all the support, everyone. Honestly, I didn't expect this post to blow up, but reading all your comments has been wild. It's good to know I'm not the only one who's dealt with a family like this. For those asking if I regret cutting them off, no, I don't. I built my life without their help, and I'm proud of where I am now. If they couldn't stand by me when I needed them, they don't get a seat at my table now that I'm successful. Appreciate all the kind words and messages. Means a lot. And to those wondering if Ryan ever reached out again, nope. Guess begging is harder without YF. Final update. Didn't think I'd be back with another update, but here we are. And yeah, you definitely gonna want to read this one. So, business has been going well. Like, really well. I've been expanding, taking on bigger clients, and getting invited to networking events that, a few years ago, I wouldn't have even known existed. It's been busy, but I've got a solid team now, which means I can actually enjoy the rewards of all that hard work. And honestly, I stopped thinking about my family and all the drama that came with them. I figured that chapter of my life was closed. Turns out Zoe didn't get the memo and decided to make a comeback. A few months ago, she popped back up. I didn't hear from her directly at first. Someone sent me a screenshot of her social media posts. Nothing too specific, but it was obvious she was throwing shade. Funny how some people get rich stepping on others. Success doesn't erase what you've done. Some people just know how to fake it. At first, I ignored it. I've got better things to do than worry about what some bitter ex-girlfriend of my brother thinks. But then she took it further. I found out she'd contacted a few of my clients. She hinted that I wasn't trustworthy, that I'd done shady stuff to get where I am. One client even asked me directly if I knew her. That's when I knew I had to shut this down fast. I didn't want to get dragged into more drama, but my business is my livelihood. I couldn't let her mess with that. So I did what any rational person would do. I called my lawyer. And trust me, it went ugly for her. So here's where things get interesting. Remember that video from years ago? The one where Zoe drunkenly confessed to lying about me? Turns out, that video was a game changer. My lawyer said it was more than enough to prove that Zoe had a history of making false claims to damage my reputation. Combine that with her recent behavior, and we had a solid case for defamation. Long story short, we filed the lawsuit. Once she realized we had the video as evidence, her attitude changed real quick. She tried to backpedal, saying she never meant to hurt my business, that her posts were just venting, and she hadn't actually lied to my clients. But it didn't matter. The video proved her credibility was shot. The case went to court. She tried to play the victim, but the video killed any chance she had. The judge didn't buy a word of her excuses. In the end, she was found liable for defamation. Not only did she have to pay damages, but she was also ordered to post a public apology on her social media platforms, acknowledging that she had lied about me in the past and that her recent statements were false. The fallout was brutal. Her so-called influencer career? Done. Her followers didn't take kindly to being lied to, and her credibility vanished overnight. Last I heard, she lost most of her brand deals, and her social media presence took a nosedive. So yeah, Zoe tried to come back and stir up trouble, but this time she faced the consequences in full. Life's good, business is thriving, and some bridges are better left burned.